Welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking a fascinating look at a piece called The Algorithmic Sculptor Manufacturing Automated Consent, just to understand exactly how the digital world is shaping our reality.
Yeah, it's a really incredible piece of work.
It really is. I mean, I want you to imagine standing in the middle of a crowded mall, right? You're screaming at the top of your lungs, and no one even blinks.
Right, which is a wild image.
Yeah. And it's not because they are ignoring you, but because the mall's owners have, seamlessly placed you inside a soundproof, invisible glass box. You think you're participating in public life, but you've actually been completely erased.
Erased from the discourse, yeah.
Exactly. So to understand how we arrived at this bizarre architectural reality online, we really have to pivot immediately to the first core concept of the source text, which is the death of the original digital agora.
Right, and the contrast between what the internet was supposed to be and what it has actually become is just staggering.
It's night and day.
It really is. I mean,
Yeah.
the architects of the early web, the people building the protocols back in the 80s and 90s, they operated on this profoundly utopian premise.
Like total freedom of information.
Exactly. They envisioned a decentralized digital landscape that functioned as a true agora, using that ancient Greek term for a public assembly or an open marketplace. The fundamental promise was the absolute free exchange of ideas.
Because before that, it was super controlled, right?
Oh, heavily. Prior to the internet, if you think about the mid-20th century, the flow of information was strictly a top-down monopoly. You had a very small, highly centralized cadre of television executives, newspaper editors, and, radio broadcasters who completely dictated what the public consumed.
Just a handful of gatekeepers.
Right. And the digital agora was engineered to shatter that bottleneck permanently.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the shift the source text describes here is structural, not just cultural.
Yes, very much so.
It's like we've moved from a chaotic, genuinely public town square, a messy patch of dirt, where literally anyone can drag a wooden soapbox, stand up, and just start yelling about their specific grievance to whoever will listen.
Right. Total chaos, but public.
Exactly. We move from that to a pristine, heavily air-conditioned, corporate-owned shopping mall. It looks like a public space. You see people walking around, chatting, sharing photos of their kids.
It's an illusion.
It's a total illusion of public space, because there are invisible security guards constantly monitoring the premises, and they are subtly dictating who is allowed to speak, what volume they're allowed to speak at, and even where the foot traffic naturally flows.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize the mechanics at play here. I mean, we've transitioned from neutral bulletin boards that were simply hosting data to these immensely complex environments governed by opaque moderation algorithms.
And those algorithms are doing the heavy lifting.
They are. These platforms actively sculpt the discourse. And the source text points out a really crucial dynamic here, which is the feedback loop.
Right, the feedback loop. How does that actually work in practice?
Well, when platforms amplify specific, brand-friendly sentiments while systematically repressing rougher, unvarnished discourse through shadow banning or engagement throttling.
They aren't just cleaning up a messy room.
No, not at all. Over time, the public consciousness simply begins to reflect the narrow range of ideas that are actually allowed to survive this digital filter.
Wow. So the danger is that we begin to mistake the artificial curation of the shopping mall for the organic reality of the world outside the mall.
Precisely. Because, think about it. If you spend 8 hours a day in an environment where certain topics never organically surface, your brain naturally concludes those topics must not be important to the wider society.
Like if no one is talking about it, it must not matter.
Right. The algorithm isn't just predicting what you want to see based on past clicks. It is actively training your baseline expectations of what reality actually consists of.
Which raises an immediate mechanical question for me. If we are standing inside this highly managed mall, how do these invisible security guards, the algorithms, actually decide who gets a megaphone and who gets shoved into the soundproof box?
Right. Like, what are the actual instructions running in the code?
Exactly. What is the code doing?
Well, it begins with a very primitive foundational imperative, which is the absolute optimization of engagement. The architecture of literally every major social media algorithm is designed around maximizing the time you spend on the platform.
Right, what the engineers call session length.
Exactly, because more time spent equals more advertisements served, which, directly translates to revenue. It's just a business model.
A very lucrative one.
Very. And to achieve this, the algorithms mathematically hunt for content that triggers high arousal emotional responses: outrage, profound joy, deep fear, tribal validation.
Because those are the psychological levers that keep human thumb scrolling.
Exactly. So there is a baseline natural selection occurring where highly emotional content automatically floats to the surface.
Wait, hold on. I get the concept of a baseline popularity contest driven by human emotion, but the paper emphasizes that the platforms don't stop there.
No, they go much further.
Right, they've shifted from just hosting a popularity contest to something much more editorial.
That shift is actually the central thesis of the text. That baseline optimization for engagement is now overlaid with a dense, highly intentional layer of corporate curation.
So they're picking winners and losers.
Yes. The platforms made a conscious decision that they must intervene to determine which ideas are, quote-unquote, harmful or brand unsafe or constitute misinformation.
Right, they're making judgment calls.
And the moment a tech company begins writing code that makes editorial judgments about the sociological validity of an idea, they cross a Rubicon. They are no longer neutral carriers of data.
Like your local telephone company simply routing a call.
Exactly. The phone company doesn't care what you say on the phone. But these platforms, they become active, opinionated editors of our shared reality.
And one of their most effective tools for editing that reality feels almost like an internet ghost story, honestly. But the paper treats it as a very concrete, measurable mechanism, which is shadow banning.
Oh, shadow banning is very real.
Right. Now, I understand the idea of shadow ban, you're screaming in the glass box like we talked about. But structurally, how does a platform do that across billions of daily posts without a massive army of human reviewers?
It relies heavily on automated behavioral analysis and natural language processing, or NLP. The system isn't usually waiting for a human moderator to, physically click a ban button.
It's all automated.
Mostly, yeah. The AI models assign trust scores to accounts and sentiment scores to individual posts. If your account history shows a pattern of engaging with controversial topics, or if you use specific combinations of words that the NLP flags as adjacent to a restricted topic,
It catches you.
right, the algorithm quietly applies a dampening weight to your post.
So they just flip a switch in the back end.
Well, it's more of a dial than a switch. They just dial your algorithmic distribution down to near zero.
Wow.
And this is brilliantly insidious from a corporate perspective. Think about it. If a platform gives you a direct, explicit ban, slapping a big red notice on your profile, you know exactly what happened.
Right. You get furious, you email customer support, you take screenshots.
Exactly. You complain to your friends on another app. The platform loses a user and potentially sparks a massive public relations backlash.
Which is bad for business.
Terribly bad. But with a shadow ban, you can still log in. You still see your own timeline. You type out your thoughts, you hit publish, and the post looks perfectly normal on your own screen.
But nobody else sees it.
Right. The algorithm has intentionally severed the routing between your post and the network's feeds. You are completely pacified by the illusion of free speech, while the impact of that speech is completely nullified.
What's terrifying about that is the psychological isolation of it all. You think you're speaking to the world, but you're just whispering into a void.
What's fascinating here is how the source text links this exact digital isolation to a foundational sociological theory from 1974.
Oh, right, the spiral of silence.
Yes, developed by Elizabeth Noel Newman. The theory posits that human beings possess this deep, evolutionary fear of social isolation. If you imagine early humans on the savannah, being isolated from the tribe meant certain death.
You couldn't survive alone.
Right. So because of this ingrained survival mechanism, we constantly, subconsciously scan our environment to assess the climate of public opinion.
Just to make sure we fit in.
Exactly. If we intuitively feel our viewpoint is in the minority, we are significantly less likely to voice it. We suppress our own thoughts to avoid being exiled from the group.
Wait, so apply that ancient survival mechanism to the modern timeline.
Well, when individuals holding dissenting or unconventional views post their thoughts and receive absolute silence.
Like 0 likes, 0 replies, 0 retweets.
Yeah, absolute crickets. They don't usually assume the algorithm is dampening them. They assume their perspective is a lonely, isolated fringe. They think, wow, not even my friends agreed with that. I must be completely out of touch.
Oh, wow.
And so they self-censor. The profound irony that the text points out is that their viewpoint might actually be incredibly widespread. Millions of people might be holding that exact same thought.
But because the NLP dialed their reach to 0,
They all sit in their individual soundproof boxes, completely convinced they're entirely alone.
So shadow banning isn't just about silencing one troublemaker. It's a stealthy corporate tactic to manage user behavior and avoid PR nightmares while simultaneously forcing a massive chunk of the population to voluntarily silence themselves.
It is the ultimate frictionless moderation. But this psychological isolation of the individual, doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's the prerequisite for a much larger group dynamic.
How so?
Well, once you can selectively amplify or silence individual voices without detection, the logical next step for the algorithmic sculptor is manufacturing what the rest of the group believes to be the absolute undeniable truth.
Which brings us to where the actual hand-to-hand combat of this ideological sculpting is taking place. It's not happening in high-minded editorial columns at major newspapers, right?
No, definitely not.
The text points out that the real battleground is the comment sections.
Yes, comment sections on platforms like YouTube or major news aggregators are the primary arenas for this. And the mechanics here are particularly potent because they rely heavily on user interaction.
Which kind of beautifully masks the algorithmic intervention.
Exactly. You have the standard upvote and downvote systems. Then, crucially, you have the automated or manual removal of what the platform defines as violating comments.
Right.
When you synthesize these two forces, amplifying the permitted thoughts through visible upvotes and quietly scrubbing the forbidden thoughts through automated removal, you present a completely manufactured, airtight consensus to the casual observer.
This taps into another massive psychological lever the text discusses, which is the concept of social proof.
Oh, social proof is huge here.
It's that old behavioral trick. Like, if you're walking down a busy city street and you see 20 people stop, all staring up at the exact same window on a skyscraper, you are going to look up.
Yeah, you literally cannot help it.
Exactly. We are hardwired to look to the behavior of the crowd to determine what is important, what is safe, and what is true.
Because social proof is an evolutionary shortcut for the human brain. It saves us the cognitive load of having to analyze every single situation from scratch. And the digital platforms weaponize this shortcut flawlessly.
So how does that play out in the comments?
Imagine a user clicks on a news video detailing a highly controversial political event. They immediately scroll down to the comments, as so many of us do.
Oh, I always do that, just to see what people are saying.
Right, to gauge what the public thinks about it.
Right.
If they enter that digital space and every single visible, highly ranked comment supports one specific narrative, complete with thousands of upvotes, their brain instantly registers that as overwhelming social proof.
So what does this all mean? I have to push back here on behalf of the listener. Doesn't an upvote system just reflect democracy in action? I mean, if a comment gets 10,000 likes, how is that algorithmic manipulation? The users are the ones voluntarily clicking the thumbs up button.
That's a great point, but the manipulation lies in the curation of the denominator.
The denominator.
Yeah. An upvote system alone would be a reflection of majority preference, but only if the playing field were completely level and all ideas were allowed to compete equally for attention.
Right, which they aren't.
Exactly. The manipulation occurs through the hidden removal of alternatives. Think of it like this. If you hold an election for mayor, and the city council secretly removes 3 of the 4 candidates from the ballot before the polls even open.
The remaining candidate might get 100% of the votes cast.
Exactly. But you haven't discovered the democratic will of the people, right? You've mathematically engineered an outcome.
That makes perfect sense. The algorithm isn't forging the upvotes, it's just ensuring that the only things available to be upvoted fall within the approved boundaries.
Exactly. What the casual user scrolling the comments doesn't see is that all the dissenting voices have been entirely scrubbed by the NLP filters. Or perhaps they've been buried at the very bottom of a collapsed thread that requires, like, 5 separate clicks to even expand.
And nobody clicks that many times.
And never. So the user is being deeply conditioned to believe that the highly visible consensus they are looking at is the only valid interpretation of the event. And over time, the text argues, this shifting of visibility alters what sociologists call the Overton window.
Right, the Overton window, meaning the window of acceptable political and social discourse in a given society.
Yes, the range of ideas that the public will accept as legitimate without dismissing them as radically extreme. By ruthlessly curating the comment sections and timelines, the platforms are actively dragging that window.
So they pull ideas they like to the center.
Exactly. Permitted ideas are pulled into the dead center of the window, normalizing them through sheer repetition. Meanwhile, removed or throttled ideas are pushed completely outside the frame.
rendering them cognitively unthinkable to the average observer who relies on social proof.
Exactly right.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. This form of systemic psychological engineering isn't a totally new fear. The source text points out that we have been warned about this exact dynamic decades before the internet was even a concept.
The literary parallels are chilling.
They really are. The paper introduces this synthesis it calls the invisible perimeter, and it maps this perimeter by combining the two greatest dystopian novels of the 20th century, which are George Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World.
The synthesis of these two authors is brilliant because, historically, literary critics and sociologists have argued endlessly over which author got the future right.
Like it had to be one or the other.
Right. Orwell feared a world of coercion, where the state banned books, where information was forcefully hidden from the public, and where truth was concealed through active suppression.
Whereas Huxley was the opposite.
Exactly. Huxley feared a world of distraction. He feared a world where no one even wanted to read a book, where there was such a deluge of trivial information that we were reduced to complete passivity, and where the truth was simply drowned in an ocean of irrelevance and endless pleasure.
And the author of this paper is arguing that we didn't just get one or the other, we got a custom-built, seamless integration of both.
We did. We really did. If we examine the Orwellian side of this invisible perimeter first, the text draws a direct line to one of the most terrifying concepts in 1984, which is newspeak.
Right, the language control.
Yeah. In the novel, the totalitarian state is actively shrinking the English language. They release new dictionaries every year with fewer words. And the logic is chillingly sound. Language is the fundamental architecture of human thought.
So if you don't have the words...
Exactly. If you eliminate the words required to conceptualize a rebellion, words like freedom or exploitation, then a rebellion becomes literally cognitively impossible to organize.
You can't commit a thought crime if you don't possess the vocabulary to form the thought in your own head.
Precisely. And the paper argues that modern social media platforms enforce a highly effective algorithmic newspeak.
How so?
They achieve this digital restriction by training their AI to aggressively flag specific keywords. If you use a word that the algorithm has deemed unsafe or controversial, your post is instantly demonetized or shadow banned.
So users have to adapt.
To survive in this ecosystem, to ensure their content actually reaches an audience, users are forced to proactively adapt their own language. They adopt what is known as algospeak.
Right. If you are listening to this and you've ever found yourself typing the word segs instead of sex, or unalive instead of suicide on your own social media, just so your friends will actually see your post, you are actively participating in algorithmic newspeak.
Good pervasive.
It really is. Content creators talking about serious historical events, true crime, or complex mental health issues are forced to use this bizarre, sanitized baby talk. Like the historical figure was unalive.
It sounds absurd.
It feels like a quirky internet trend, like a meme. But the text is warning us that this linguistic restriction actually dictates the absolute boundaries of serious societal discussion.
And the linguistic degradation is profound. When you force an entire generation to discuss complex, often dark or difficult realities using sanitized, algorithmically approved euphemisms, you degrade the society's capacity to seriously engage with nuance.
You strip the gravity from the discourse.
Absolutely. Furthermore, the Orwellian parallel extends to the systemic erasure of history. In 1984, the protagonist, Winston Smith's job was to drop inconvenient historical documents into the memory hole.
Which was basically an incinerator.
Right, an incinerator that wiped the past clean to match the state's current narrative.
And the digital equivalent is when a platform just wipes an entire hashtag off the map.
Yes, the modern frictionless memory hole. When if a platform unilaterally decides to scrub thousands of accounts or ban a specific search term, inconvenient sentiments, controversial evidence, or dissenting viewpoints aren't just hidden, they are functionally erased from the collective digital record.
Because if it's not online, it doesn't exist.
For a society that uses the internet as its primary archive of reality, deletion is the equivalent of non-existence.
But as aggressive as that Orwellian scrubbing is, it wouldn't be sustainable if the population was constantly enraged by it. People would eventually revolt against the bouncer at the club taking away their vocabulary.
They would.
And that's where Aldous Huxley enters the chat. Huxley's the bartender keeping us completely pacified with an endless stream of free, high-dopamine drinks.
The Huxleyan mechanism is what makes the system so resilient. In Brave New World, the population is kept docile not through violence, but through soma, which is a state-issued narcotic that provides immediate, consequence-free pleasure and distraction.
And what's the modern soma?
The source text identifies the modern soma as the infinite scroll. Think about the physical action of scrolling. It is not just a way to view content. It is a behavioral Skinner box.
Just constantly pulling the lever for a reward.
Exactly. The algorithms are exquisitely tuned to keep the public in a constant state of high dopamine engagement.
I've heard it called a slot machine in your pocket, but I actually think a better metaphor from the text might be a digital thermostat for your mood.
Oh, a digital thermostat is an excellent way to conceptualize it. The algorithm constantly monitors your behavioral temperature.
Like if you're getting too hot or too cold.
Right. If you linger on a complex, frustrating political post and your engagement metrics suggest you might be getting annoyed enough to close the app, the thermostat immediately injects a highly engaging, low-friction piece of entertainment.
Like a funny animal video.
Or a comforting piece of tribal validation, yeah. Just to cool you down and keep you on the platform. It regulates your mood to prevent you from leaving.
And the algorithm deliberately rewards you with that dopamine hit for staying within the allowed ideological range.
By curating a feed that constantly reinforces a single, comfortable worldview, interspersed with heavy entertainment, the algorithm effectively trains your brain.
So we're basically being conditioned.
Yes. Over time, this conditioning ensures that when a user does accidentally stumble across a dissenting idea or a complex opposing viewpoint that somehow slipped past the filters, it doesn't feel like an intellectual challenge to be engaged with.
How does it feel?
It feels emotionally distressing. It feels like an aggressive attack on their psychological equilibrium. They are trained to immediately swipe away from the discomfort and return to the soothing soma of the curated feed.
Wow. So Orwell removes the words we need to fight back, and Huxley removes our desire to even try. Together, they build an invisible perimeter that the user naturally never wants to cross.
That's a very effective trap.
But if Orwell and Huxley gave us the psychology of this system, we really have to transition to economics to find the structural blueprint of why it's happening. Because these algorithms didn't just fall out of the sky.
No, they certainly didn't.
They were built by corporations with very specific financial imperatives.
Right. To understand the economic foundation of the algorithmic Sculptor, the source text leans heavily on a legendary work of political science, which is Noam Chomsky and Edward S. Herman's Manufacturing Consent.
Such a classic book.
It is. Published back in 1988, their core argument was revolutionary. They posited that in democratic societies, the ruling elite don't need a heavy-handed, centralized ministry of truth or secret police to control public opinion.
Right, you don't need the KGB.
Exactly. Instead, information is naturally purified on its way to the public through a series of structural economic filters inherent to mass media.
And what the paper is arguing is that in the digital age, Chomsky's analog editorial filters have been ruthlessly automated by machine learning. It's a seamless transition from the smoke-filled editorial boardroom to the server farm.
The structural incentives remain identical. Only the speed and scale have changed. The text breaks down Chomsky's 5 filters and applies them directly to today's code.
Okay, let's go through them. What's the first one?
The first filter is ownership. In Chomsky's era, this referred to a few wealthy families owning the major newspapers and television networks. Today, the scale of ownership is astronomically larger.
Because tech companies are massive.
Right. The modern digital pipes, the cloud hosting, the app stores, the search algorithms, they are owned by a handful of trillion-dollar tech conglomerates.
Companies with market caps larger than the GDP of most nations.
Exactly. And the paper makes a crucial observation here. The primary overarching interest of these corporate behemoths is the maintenance of the prevailing economic status quo.
Because the status quo made them rich.
Exactly. They are the ultimate beneficiaries of the current global system. Therefore, they have absolutely zero incentive to design algorithms that naturally amplify ideas that threaten the stability of that system.
Like radical wealth redistribution or deep critiques of consumerism.
Or anti-monopoly sentiment. The ownership class sets the baseline parameters of the code.
Which bleeds directly into the second filter, which the text argues is the most pervasive of all, which is advertising.
Yes, the advertising filter.
Social media platforms, despite all their lofty mission statements about connecting the world, are at their core just incredibly sophisticated advertising engines.
They are funded entirely by corporate sponsors.
Right. Therefore, the algorithms are strictly programmed to favor what marketers call a supportive selling environment. But again, let's proxy the listener here. How does code actually measure a supportive environment?
It comes back to natural language processing and programmatic ad bidding. A supportive selling environment means keeping the user in a receptive, positive, or at least predictable emotional state so they are psychologically primed to buy a product.
So no bummers allowed.
Essentially, yes. When a creator uploads a video, the AI instantly scans the transcript and the metadata. It tokenizes the words and runs sentiment analysis.
In fractions of a second.
Yes. If the AI detects high arousal negative keywords, words related to systemic corruption, poverty, violence, or deep social unrest, it automatically assigns that content a low brand safety score.
Because no major advertiser wants their cheerful commercial for a new minivan playing immediately after a deeply distressing, highly critical video about corporate malfeasance.
Precisely. In the millisecond ad auctions that happen behind the scenes, major brands utilize API filters that say, do not bid on content with a low brand safety score.
So the money just vanishes.
Right. If a post is deemed unsafe for brands, it cannot generate revenue. And because the platform's goal is revenue, the algorithm naturally suppresses the difficult, critical content, starving it of reach. The system economically disincentivizes deep dissent simply by cutting off its oxygen supply.
It's incredible. Are we just a bewildered herd trapped in a lively debate, completely oblivious to the fact that the walls of our terrarium were built by advertisers? It feels like we are passionately arguing over the furniture arrangement inside a house built entirely by corporate sponsors.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer is largely yes. The environment is engineered to manage the herd. And this management is further reinforced by the third filter, which is sourcing.
Right, sourcing. How did that work originally?
In the past, Chomsky argued that reporters relied heavily on official government press releases and corporate PR departments because it was cheaper and easier than doing expensive adversarial investigative journalism. The news was inherently biased toward institutional sources.
And in the automated era, how does the code handle sourcing?
Algorithms are explicitly programmed to prioritize what the platforms define as authoritative sources. We see this mechanically during any major breaking news event.
Right, like an election or a crisis.
Exactly. The code is designed to artificially boost domains belonging to legacy media institutions, government agencies, and verified corporate bodies. The algorithms assign these domains massive PageRank-style authority weights.
While pushing down everyone else.
Yes. Simultaneously, the code deliberately suppresses independent voices, citizen journalists, or alternative media platforms, regardless of the actual veracity of their reporting.
So they anchor the narrative to elite institutions. Even if an independent creator on the ground has a better, more accurate, or more nuanced piece of footage of an event, the machine looks at the metadata and says, no, you don't have the institutional badge. We are pushing the legacy network anchor broadcasting from a studio in New York to the top of the feed.
It centralizes narrative control mechanically, bypassing human editorial judgment entirely during the critical early hours of an event.
Which is wild. What's the fourth filter?
Then we move to the fourth filter, which is FLAC. In Chomsky's original model, FLAC was negative pushback, like lawsuits, organized advertiser boycotts, letters to the editor, political pressure.
Stuff that takes a lot of effort to organize.
Exactly. Producing FLAC in the analog era required immense coordinated effort from powerful interest groups. Today, the text points out, FLAC has been fully automated through AI moderation.
Preemptive algorithmic moderation.
Exactly. The AI models are trained on vast data sets of past controversies and advertiser boycotts. The algorithm learns the patterns of what causes a public relations headache.
It sees the patterns in the data.
Yes. It is then deployed to preemptively flag, demonetize, or suppress any content that it calculates might spark a political inquiry or trigger an advertiser revolt in the future.
So it stops the problem before it even happens.
The machine anticipates the FLAC and silences the user before the FLAC can even materialize. It is a system of total preemptive compliance. The environment is sterilized of controversy before the controversy can even begin.
And finally, we have the fifth filter, which Chomsky originally called the ideology filter. During the Cold War era, when he wrote the book, this was specifically anti-communism. It was the mobilization of the public against a singular, unifying, existential enemy.
Right. And in the modern algorithmic context, this filter has evolved into something deeply insidious and arguably more destructive. It's the architecture of the echo chamber itself.
How does the algorithm weaponize the echo chamber?
To maximize engagement, the algorithm traps users in hyperpolarized bubbles, where the other side, and this applies equally whether you're on the political left or the political right, is constantly portrayed as a literal existential threat to your way of life.
Right, you only see the worst of the other side.
The algorithm feeds you an endless stream of the most extreme, unhinged examples of your political opponents.
It fundamentally dehumanizes the opposition to keep you clicking out of fear and outrage.
And by doing so, it creates exactly what Chomsky described, which is a strictly limited spectrum of acceptable opinion. You are mobilized against a common enemy, which keeps you distracted from analyzing the structure of the system itself.
This is the part of the text that really hit me the hardest. The paper notes that users are allowed, even encouraged, to engage in incredibly lively debate. We feel like we are fighting for the very soul of the country online every single day.
We feel very engaged.
Exactly. We are typing furiously. We are furious at the other side. We feel deeply civically engaged. But we are only debating within a tiny, artificially constrained spectrum that the automated filters have permitted.
The boundaries are already set.
Right. The underlying structural issues, the power of the trillion-dollar conglomerates, the surveillance economy, the reality of the algorithmic manipulation itself, those topics rarely trend. They are starved of algorithmic oxygen. The lively, polarized debate is actually a decoy.
That is the absolute essence of automated consent. It is decentralized. There is no dictator standing at a microphone barking orders.
It's all just math.
It relies entirely on the invisible, binary logic of algorithmic curation to marginalize profound dissent, rendering it completely invisible to the vast majority of users, the bewildered herd, who are kept perpetually distracted by the sanctioned, highly polarized outrage of the day.
Which inevitably leads to the most critical turning point question of this entire deep dive. Hearing all of this, exploring the sheer scale of the psychological and economic mechanics at play, it sounds like an inescapable trap.
It definitely feels that way.
Right. Is this just the inevitable destiny of code and machine learning? Like, once you invent a neural network and let it loose on human data, is this just what it naturally does? Or is a group of human engineers actively choosing to build the system this way?
Well, the source text confronts this question directly, and the reality is a symbiosis of both algorithmic drift and human intent.
Okay, break that down.
On one hand, unsupervised machine learning does have a natural drift toward outrage. If left purely to its own mathematical devices, an engagement-seeking neural network quickly discovers that human beings will stare at a digital car crash, angry tribal conflict, longer than they will stare at a nuanced policy discussion.
We just love a train wreck.
We do. However, the text makes it emphatically clear. The fundamental objectives of these systems, the ultimate guardrails, are determined entirely by human intent.
The algorithm is just a perfect, ruthless mirror of its optimization metrics.
Exactly. The machine only solves the math problem you give it. When human engineers, operating under immense pressure from corporate executives, write code that prioritizes metrics like daily active users, session length, or brand safety scores, they are making conscious, deliberate design choices.
And those choices have consequences.
Massive consequences. Those specific profit-driven metrics mathematically necessitate the narrowing of the public square. They require the algorithm to pacify the user, eliminate challenging friction, and suppress unmonetizable dissent.
It's like programming a GPS system. If you program your car's GPS to find the fastest route, it's going to take you on the massive, concrete, 8-lane highway, even if it's ugly, stressful, and bypasses the actual community.
Right, it's just following instructions.
Exactly. If you program it to find the scenic route, it's going to take you through the mountains. The code itself isn't evil. It doesn't have a moral preference. It is just ruthlessly executing the exact metric it was given by the driver.
This raises an important question, and it's where the paper offers a crucial structural ray of hope.
Oh, good. Some hope.
Yes. The technology of artificial intelligence is not inherently destined to divide or repress us. The exact same sophisticated neural networks that are currently used to silo us into paranoid echo chambers could, theoretically, be utilized for the exact opposite purpose.
How so?
The text introduces emerging engineering frameworks like Pro-Plurality AI and bridging algorithms.
Bridging algorithms. I love this concept. How do those work mechanically in contrast to the engagement-optimized models we have now?
Rather than optimizing for cheap agreement within an isolated bubble or optimizing for furious outrage by smashing two extreme bubbles together, bridging algorithms are mathematically designed to identify and reward hidden common ground between highly polarized groups.
Let's ground this in a concrete example. Imagine a highly toxic debate playing out online about urban zoning laws, right? renters versus landlords, and AMBYs versus developers. Usually the algorithm pushes the angriest, most extreme voices on both sides to the top to generate sparks.
Right, to maximize engagement.
How does a bridging algorithm change that?
Well, a bridging algorithm uses complex matrix factorization and user cluster analysis. It maps the two polarized groups. Then, instead of looking for the content that causes the most friction between them, the AI hunts for nuance.
What does that look like?
It looks for a specific piece of content, perhaps a deeply researched 500-word essay about creating walkable green spaces that benefit both property values and public health. The algorithm notices that users from both the extreme developer cluster and the extreme NMBY cluster are unexpectedly reading this essay, lingering on it, and quietly liking it.
Oh, wow, so it finds the overlap.
Exactly. The system identifies that specific essay as a bridge. It then applies a mathematical bridging bonus. It artificially amplifies that unifying content, distributing it widely across the network, specifically because it has proven capable of speaking to diverse opposing perspectives.
It structurally rewards the bridge instead of the wall.
Precisely. It changes the economic incentive for creators. If bridging algorithms were the dominant metric, creators would be incentivized to produce nuanced, unifying content rather than polarizing outrage.
Which would completely change the internet.
Completely. And the fact that these bridging algorithms are currently computationally possible proves the most vital point of the entire source text. The current toxic state of digital curation is not a technological finality. We're not doomed by the math.
It's a choice.
It is a political and economic choice. The algorithmic sculptor could absolutely be retrained tomorrow to build a healthier society, provided the corporate architects of these platforms choose to value cognitive diversity over the highly profitable manufactured uniformity we have right now.
But what if they don't? What if the financial incentives of the current Chomsky-esque propaganda model are just too strong? If the architects refuse to change the optimization metrics, what happens to us? What is the long-term sociological consequence of living inside this invisible perimeter generation after generation?
The paper defines the ultimate consequence as the mirror effect, and this is perhaps the most sobering epistemological warning in the text.
The mirror effect.
Yes. It posits that human society, eventually, inevitably begins to reflect the digital environment it inhabits. It's a fundamental principle of human adaptation. Think about a child born today.
Right, growing up totally online.
If an entire generation of citizens is raised exclusively inside a digital ecosystem where certain historical interpretations, complex political theories, or specific structural critiques are systematically suppressed by NLP brand safety filters, those ideas don't just disappear from the social media feed.
They disappear from real life.
Eventually, they cease to exist in the cultural lexicon altogether.
Because in a digitized society, if it's not on the feed, it literally didn't happen. If an idea isn't searchable, it functionally doesn't exist in the human record.
Right. It leads to what philosophers call epistemological closure. And the profound danger here lies in the total homogenization of thought.
Yeah.
By continually, algorithmically preventing the expression of unacceptable or brand unsafe ideas, the platforms eliminate friction from the human experience.
Let me push back on that for a second, though, because I think a lot of people might feel differently. Isn't a little less friction a good thing? Anyone who has spent 10 minutes on a completely unmoderated Wild West internet forum knows it can be an absolute sewer of toxicity.
Oh, absolutely. It could be awful.
If the algorithm uses NLP to remove aggressive, highly toxic, or weird fringe ideas, doesn't that just make society a bit more peaceful, a bit more polite? Why do we need the friction?
It creates the illusion of a polite society, but at a catastrophic cognitive cost. Friction, the intellectual friction of encountering opposing viewpoints, is entirely necessary for robust critical thinking.
Like exercise for the brain.
Exactly. Intellectual muscle is built by encountering ideas that challenge you, ideas that deeply offend you, ideas that force you to articulate and defend your own convictions.
And what happens when we don't do that?
When a corporate platform pre-chews your reality and removes all the friction to keep advertisers happy, your cognitive muscles literally atrophy. The text argues that a society that only ever sees what it is allowed to see loses the fundamental human ability to navigate complexity.
We just lose the skill entirely.
We lose the capacity to engage with genuine difference in the real world. When you are suddenly confronted with a complex, real-world geopolitical or social problem, that doesn't have a sanitized, algorithmically approved good versus evil solution, you panic.
Because you've never had to deal with it before.
Right. The public ultimately becomes a mere reflection of the algorithm's corporate preferences. We unwittingly adopt the shallow values and the restricted vocabularies that the system is calculated to be the most profitable and the least disruptive to the status quo.
Which brings us to the ultimate conclusion of what the algorithmic sculptor is actually building. This has been a massive, structurally complex journey, so let's do a quick, energetic recap of the ground we've covered today.
We covered a lot.
We really have. We started by exploring the death of the early digital agora and the rise of the heavily managed, artificially curated corporate mall. We unpacked the insidious mechanics of NLP shadow banning and how the weaponization of social proof in comment sections mechanically shifts the Overton window.
Yes.
We saw how the modern internet has somehow managed to combine Orwell's linguistic restriction, stripping our vocabulary with algo speak, with Huxley's digital thermostat of paralyzing infinite scroll pleasure. We mapped Chomsky's 5 filters of propaganda directly onto modern ad bidding code, showing how trillions of dollars of corporate advertising necessitate a sanitized, heavily managed reality.
All mathematically enforced.
Exactly. We discovered that this isn't inevitable, that the math behind bridging algorithms could save us if we choose to build them. And finally, we stared into the chilling reality of the mirror effect, where we lose our cognitive diversity entirely if we surrender to the code.
And synthesizing all of that complex machinery, the final overarching thesis from the source text is profound in its simplicity. The power to decide what is mathematically seen is the power to decide what is ultimately thought.
It's all about visibility.
Yes. By combining deeply ingrained psychological vulnerabilities with automated economic filters, modern digital platforms have constructed a system of societal control that is vastly more resilient than any historical predecessor.
Because it's invisible.
Exactly. It is resilient precisely because it does not require the visible, terrifying violence of a totalitarian state. It operates silently, efficiently, invisibly, through the mechanics of the algorithm and the market.
We are led to believe we are participating in a free and open public square.
Yes. The manufacturing of consent is no longer a clumsy manual process of human editorial choice. It is a self-sustaining cycle of automated curation. But, and this is the crucial takeaway the author leaves us with, recognizing that this is a deliberate design choice provides us with immense agency.
We can choose differently.
The perimeter is currently sculpted to protect institutional interests. And as the mirror effect takes hold, the human mind adapts to those artificial constraints. But if we want to preserve a truly open, resilient society, the text concludes, we must actively demand a structural shift.
We have to ask for better code.
We must demand algorithms that mathematically foster plurality and reward the bridge over the wall. Because when a platform curates reality, it isn't just sorting data on a server. It is ultimately attempting to curate the future of human consciousness. And it is our task to ensure that the future remains as vast, complex, and deeply diverse as the human experience itself.
Think about a deeply held belief you currently have, something you consider absolutely foundational to who you are and how you view the world. Consider whether that belief is truly yours, forged through independent thought, intellectual friction, and genuine exploration, or consider the possibility that it is simply the path of least algorithmic resistance, a reality you are quietly nudged onto after years of infinite managed scrolling. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for listening.